The Audio Train programme is supported by the following businesses. Tysers, a leading media insurance company. Prager Metis, an international advisory and accounting firm. Mint & Co, a dynamic legal and business affairs company. And NoteTracks, a platform for audio producers, engineers and collaborators to take notes, get feedback and share projects. Audio Train is part of Audio UK, the trade association for professional audio production companies.
Hello and welcome to today's Audio Train webinar on working with brands. Over the next hour or so, we're going to learn about some strategies for working with clients. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom and we'll try to get to them at the end of the session. So thank you for joining us today, and a really big thank you to Katharine Kerr, Director of Podcast Pioneers, whose enthusiasm to do this webinar on working with brands was so contagious. I'm really looking forward to watching and learning. I've seen your presentation, Katharine, and there's quite a lot to fit in over the next hour, so over to you.
Oh, thank you, Rosie, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's really great to be here talking to everybody. I know everyone's from a whole range of different backgrounds as well, so I'm going to, try not to talk at 1,000 miles per hour, and we have so much to cover. And as Rosie said, if you do have any questions, if there's any terminology that comes up that I'm just trotting out that needs explaining at the end, please also do just say so, and we'll come to that later on. But yeah. Thanks for having me, everyone. So I'm Katharine, I run Podcast Pioneers, and we're a production company that makes audio for brands and pretty much exclusively podcasts these days. So we work with brands from the change they want to create and build a strategy around that. So we use audio to its full effect, and we combine it with their other channels as well, other comms channels that they're speaking to audiences through already, perhaps, or we might be helping them build audiences from scratch. It depends. So today I'm going to share my approach and experiences of producing audio for brands. Now, as I say, that's purely in the podcast space nowadays, but it's been very much informed by my background in commercial radio and a lot of thinking and experimenting I've done since. So as I say, I know everyone's coming from a whole range of different backgrounds. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I hope you're all able to take something helpful from this session. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history here, and just so you don't have to look at my face the whole time, we've got a few slides to go through today. So a little on who I am and why this is my specialism. So as I mentioned earlier, I started working in commercial radio, in station imaging actually, in branding and station sound for the GCAP networks and later Global. And then there I led the production team that wrote and made commercial programming content for several of their networks. And what that involved was working across different tones, languages and sounds. At that time, Global was very much driven by a consistency of sound across its brands, but a distinction between them. And at the heart of that was this audience demographic, which was then based on kind of the traditional age range, household, lifestyle, and income sort of parameters. And basically, all this was really good training in audience-led branding and moving this over into the on-demand audio space, but also in, as a producer, balancing my own creative ideas with those of client campaigns and their bigger picture, as well as station sound branding. So a lot in the mix there. So when I left radio, I went to kind of combine writing and journalism. And then I put that together with brand work and then audio, and a desire to do something maybe a little more in depth than the music radio I had been doing. And I haven't really looked back, because branded podcasting around that time was really starting to gain momentum. So yeah, it's not all been easy, especially not at the start, but I'll come back to that a little bit later on. So I firstly just wanted to pause on this definition of what do we mean by brand. So I think when we say the word branded content, we can use this term to differentiate between conventional commissioners that we're used to in audio, perhaps, and everyone else who's paying to make content and has their own agenda. And I think this can cause us a few problems, because I think brands When we say brands, we mean organisations that are independently funding their own podcast productions. They're not being commissioned by any big platform. These are businesses that want to build a conversation and connect with an audience. They want to educate, change perceptions, challenge convention, and much more besides. And they're investing time and money in making something, and they want to see an impact. So yes, they have an agenda, and there's nothing wrong with that. So historically, there seems to be this kind of, I'm sure you've all heard it, this old narrative of the dirty commercial stuff versus the noble public cause of the content. But, it used to, maybe still does exist in some places in commercial radio, where you kind of have programming and commercial splitting themselves off, and, it almost feels like they're serving different stakeholders. But ultimately, the audience is your stakeholder for everyone. And there's just different steps in the process. So the same with branded content, branded audio. In reality, every brand is serving an audience. And if it's to be successful, they have to have a stake in their listeners' opinions. So brand work, the way I see it, is really giving value to an audience in order to receive value. So I'm not a marketer by trade, by the way. This is just how I've come to reflect on it. And when we say brands, we don't just kind of mean mobile phone companies and insurance firms and the like, and services, but we talk about organisations who have often brave, bold, unusual, and diverse information and ideas to offer to audiences. So for me, this is the first thing that kind of needs to be cleared up if you're to work with brands in a meaningful way. So furthermore, as producers and creatives, we also need to feel like our work is important and valuable to someone too. So getting on board with the cause is really important to a good outcome all round. I'm realising I'm talking quite fast, so just going to slow that down. In podcasting, the brand has, I think, now learned to take the backseat. And there's kind of not the hard sell in this space that you might expect with advertising, for example. The creative and the audio experience takes precedent now, and brands are happy to be the providers of such content. So whether it's podcasts or other form of branded audio. So today, brands are really seeing the value in just giving value to listeners. Okay. A lot to say here. I'm not going to do a history of podcasting, you'll be pleased to know, but I'm going to add a little background on branded podcasting and the changes we've seen in more recent years, because I think what has happened with the growth in branded podcasting is an enormous injection of funding and real opportunity into the audio sector, which is awesome, but it wouldn't have happened without the technology to support it as well. So, of course, brands have been using audio for yonks, but with the rise of on-demand audio and technology accelerating and being adopted more quickly in around the mid-2010s, things really did change and start to speed up. So we had, I've put their smartphones on the slides. We had an increase in smartphone app adoption and innovation in this space. We had integration with other audio, integration of audio with other technologies. We had data becoming more sophisticated so that brands could demonstrate return on investment. And we had increased exposure, increased demand. And there's this kind of snowball effect, which meant that after taking a little while to gain momentum, you reach this kind of watermark in adoption, and podcasts became more mainstream. So that meant that brands had the two things they really needed to invest, which was a bigger potential reach in the medium and some serious potential for measurement as well. So the audio industry really has been cranking along since then and continuing to innovate, not just in audio programs, but products and services that allow you to measure it too. So I want to just step back to, I'm going to go for that 2015, mid-2010s moment specifically. Maybe you can remember where you were. I just left radio. It seems like a long time ago. It wasn't that much, but definitely eons in terms of what's happened in the audio industry. So yeah, personally, I went off after leaving radio and then helped a TV production company that was moving into audio. And that was because Audible were beginning to commission their pilots, a pilot podcast series. And this TV production company was stepping into audio via podcasting. And so they were harnessing their archives, talent relationships that they had to create something brand new for them in their business. And they needed to work out what it would cost as a series. They needed to work out how they staffed it, how they did audio, what equipment they needed, what different formats would mean for their bottom line. And actually, anyone who wasn't a traditional audio production company had to do a little bit of this at this point, because perhaps audio first companies had a head start because they already had a lot of the expertise. But it quickly emerged that on-demand audio wasn't just the same as radio. And it had a whole different scope in terms of the format and style and deliverables. So it was a very exciting time. But at the same time, around this middle moment, I personally met up with another producer who had an in with a national heritage brand, and he wanted to get together to try and pitch podcasts to them. So I went, yeah, great. So we spent absolutely months and months and months sort of chipping away, trying to convince them to do this, really. And they were interested. They were taking the meetings. But at that point, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people who were pitching into brands, is that you had to do a lot of explaining what podcasts were, how you access them as a listener, how you got good data out of them, and actually how they brought value back to the brand. So, and how they did them, what kind of investment they needed. It was a massive conversation. It was so different if you think about where we are today, where brands are saying we've got to have a podcast. We just need the right people to do it. So anyway, I'll skip to the end. That particular client, we looked at their 2020 strategy, which, sort of in 2015, I think 2020 was supposed to be a pretty good year, wasn't it? Lots of stuff achieved. So we based a pitch and a proposal around what their business goals were. And, that was at the heart of their programming and the talent that we used. So they did actually commission a pilot series in the end. And today they have an in-house department making podcasts. So a very different landscape back then to where we suddenly find ourselves today, not too many years on. So in summary, the mid-2010s, they were kind of a turning point for brands commissioning audio. So not only was the technology and measurability becoming possible, but brands began to realise there was room for interesting audio programmes within their marketing mix. And it was also a turning point, obviously, for audio production companies and for freelancers, because not only, there was suddenly an infinite number of new commissioners entering the game and wanting their expertise and creativity. So there are more and more ways to listen to audio programs and more people starting to see their value. And let's not forget, a big turning point for tech companies, strategists, analysts, and investors as well. But most of all, it was a turning point for listeners. So there were programs on almost any topic they liked all of a sudden, more and more every day. There were answers to questions they had, and they were free to access. And, if that program didn't exist, they could kind of get a microphone and make it themselves. So today, I'm about to take you through the process I have when working with a brand for the first time. And that's any brand too. But I just thought I wanted to lay down some principles that I personally operate on, that I find helpful, which maybe you will too. So there's enormous room for innovation in this market now, continued growth and continued sophistication. Even if the market does seem to be maturing, I'm sure there's a lot more to do. But I think, with these principles, you're probably on a good path to making a good program collaboratively with happy clients that, you have a great relationship with. So number one, branded content does not have to be boring or stale or unimaginative. In fact, it's better if it's not, funnily enough. It should challenge misconceptions, in my view, overcome disengagement, share something really valuable. And it's not just about the money or the reach, it's about making a change. And, it can be meaningful brand work for purpose-driven companies if you do it right. Principle 2, niche content is not without value to someone. In deeply engaged mediums like this, the impact you can make on a smaller group of people is long-term and can have lasting influence. So it's not a passing interaction, but a chance to talk to people about topics they really care about and stay with them. 3, branded content does not mean you've sold your soul to the devil. You're there to find value in an organisation and to help them give that to a specific audience with the power of audio. So using your own expertise, you're meant to create an audience experience that is fantastic and emotional and memorable. So depending on the brief, this might be your biggest test. Point number 4, enjoy your raw materials and someone else will enjoy the finished product. So by this, I mean that if you fall in love with what you're doing, then someone else definitely will. I think true passion really seems to shine through in a finished production, because you end up going that extra mile. Number 5, clients are human beings and you're providing a service. So the relationship you build with them is really essential to your project success and the well-being of your team, and also series 2, hopefully. Number 6, every branded project is bespoke to the needs of that organisation. So being flexible, collaborative and imaginative as a producer is really key. 7, there are so many opportunities out there. If you don't believe in the purpose of one project, perhaps walk away and find what you're meant to be making. And conversely, just the last point, nobody owes you that commission. If a pitch gets rejected in a competitive tender and it was the best thing you ever wrote, like by all means feel very sad for a day or two, but then just go and find someone who shares your values and vision and wants to make that program. Maybe that just wasn't the right brand for it. So anyway, thinking like that personally, it definitely helps the sting of rejection when it comes from time to time. So let's get into the kind of process now. Perhaps you might be asked by a client to build an audio program they've already planned and leave the rest to them, which is lovely. And I definitely don't need to tell you how to do that. That's an easy day. But more often than not, you will meet with a client and they'll have an idea of what they want to do. And it's your job to have the conversations where you pick it apart and get to the purpose of that and find out what they should be doing, really. So you're the audio expert, and what works in TV or social media might not be appropriate for an on-demand audio listener. So in addition to the kind of service you provide different clients, it might be different. They might want more than just audio production. They might want social media support. They might want strategy, asset creation and guidance on marketing or advertising too. So it's also about defining that at the start and what you're able to provide, what you want to provide, and where you need to maybe bring in extra support. And when an inquiry comes in, I always set up a call at the start just so that I can have that kind of initial sense. It's a really quick way of just, even if it's a few minutes, just to get a scope for what the creativity of the project is and what they have in mind. And although it might be quite a brief fact-finding hunt, it will allow you to put together an idea, at least, that addresses the pain points in their comms. There's a reason, after all, why they're coming to podcasts. Another thing I'll say at this point is, even if they have come to you, they probably are speaking to other production companies. So you're still in a pitching process. They're going to be looking at what everyone else can offer for a price. And even if you do win the business, just expect that idea to evolve and develop a bit more, subject to contract and what you agree early on. That's another really important thing, which we'll come back to a bit later on. So for these reasons, I think it's really helpful to respond with a couple of different treatments. So you can give them a window within their budget, a cost frame and some time frames. And it also makes it clear from the start that there's no limit to the creativity of what you can do together. But it also sets it up for them that sort of really big, detailed documentary style productions, loads of location stuff might be a bit more expensive than a quick and simple format. So obviously, all of this in your pitch process, early in the pitch process, helps your clients make a good decision for their needs and budget too. So these 10 questions are the key things I'd want to find out or get my client to think about before getting into the production. And hopefully, when you put these answers together, you'll likely, have a clear framework for your campaign. And I think it's really great if you can find out some of the biggest answers earlier on, because it informs you a lot more on the service that they're looking for, how you might work with them, and how your podcast or audio program fits with everything else that they're doing in terms of comms. So I'm going to go through these 10 points one by one now. And the first one, what is the change you want to create? Simply put, what does that brand or organisation want their audience to think, feel and do? They're making a programme because they want to create an action, a thought, an emotion, and a memory, and a conversation with a specific person. So who is it? Why do they want that podcast? Is it the right medium for this message? And, they're putting their hard-fought marketing budget behind this, or their digital budget behind this to achieve a result that they can measure. So keeping this question in sight, what is it they actually want to achieve, should always be in sight for your campaign. A lot of brands, for example, might want to change perception. They might want to convey some really complex information to a new audience or put it in everyday terms. They might want to make people understand and realise the value of their products and services in everyday life. And whatever the answer to that is, it's going to be the guiding light for their campaign and for your creative approach as well. Next question, who is it for and what can you offer them? Successful marketing and communications knows who it's speaking to, and it makes it about that person, their experiences and their needs. But it's easy to get carried away and lose sight of this. So the producer needs to keep the brand focused on delivering value to their audience. Why is this thing you're making impactful to that audience, and how will this bring value into their lives? How is it unique to the brand's competition? And what problems or pain points will it solve for the listener? Brands which can reach an audience at scale will be making content that's not only valuable, but which values them, and it provides quality content that respects their commitment as well. Because we're not talking 5 seconds, we're talking 20 minutes maybe. Listen through rates do vary. So podcasts do exist because people have questions and they want answers. They want to make their world better. So knowing the audience is a vital part of delivering that with your content. The brand might have some experts. They might be experts in that, and they might be able to offer you insights into that. They might have done some market research. They might have other insights into lifestyles, habits, and other concerns for that market, which is really helpful to you, because you can then design a program that's easy for that person to access, that market to access, really nice for them to listen to, a really good incentive, especially when they've got busy lives. And what's more, if you have that kind of insight, you may have to go and gather a bit of it yourself. What's more, you'll be able to identify the interests and emotional triggers for that audience. And the goal of all of this is to enhance the life of that listener where they listen to your program, basically. So they keep coming back for more. And I just want to raise my slightly cheesy point about emotion here, because this is the real driver of action. Emotion, audio is so perfect for creating emotion. And, you can convey so much with so little in terms of sound, because it's so very intimate, and especially with podcasts, for example, the way they're listened to. So if you can use audio to kind of capture and create emotion, your listeners move to think, they make a memory, the connection that they have with that program and ultimately the provider of it is hopefully deeper. So do use what the brand already has in terms of insights to inform your creative approach. So what resources does your client have in-house, and what do they need help with? This kind of work in branded audio is really bespoke. So you might be working with digital teams, as I say, you might be working with marketing teams, or a mix of different departments across the business. You have to almost sometimes become like this kind of plug into their business to kind of fulfill the need of whatever that particular project is. So with an increased understanding of the medium, brands are getting loads better at setting aside proper budgets, not just for freelance editors, but for all the bells and whistles that you'd need for a proper grown-up campaign, and a production that's well promoted as well, which is so important. Again, we'll come back to that in a bit. So it's important to make sure, though, from the start that your client is aware that a complex, multifaceted production with lots of recordings or heavy research will take a lot more time, energy, and expertise than simpler ones. Have a look at what time, talent, and money they have available in-house. Be upfront at the start about the associated costs of outsourcing all of this stuff too. They need to make decisions on their budget as well. So it's okay to, I think, show the what's the word I'm looking for? The kind of the workings underneath how much time this stuff actually takes. And when it comes to the client's own time, they probably need a project manager at the very least to consolidate the feedback from different stakeholders, to communicate with you and your team on a regular basis, and seek sign-off as well. So it can be a bit of a spirit dampening conversation where you start to talk about all the mechanics of it all. So just, I would say at this stage, keep them in sight of the big picture as well, the values of being really creative and original, and just get them excited about the big blue sky idea. It's all doable, and there's always ways of getting things done, I find, if everyone really wants to pull together. So she says. If you want to give them a framework, I've got a few questions that I think you could pose to them, or actions you could pose to them. So it just helps them think a bit more about their resourcing in detail. So I would say get a working group together, ask them to get a working group together within their organisation to look at their possible roles. So where's the expertise? Who's the stakeholders? Who has sign-off? Have a look at background expertise, contributors, partners and contacts who might be available for research or interviews within the organisation or related to projects they're running, maybe other video projects or promotional stuff that they've done. It seems like a no-brainer if you're working in the media, but maybe not so to connect all the dots when you're in a particularly a big organisation with lots of different areas and focuses at any one time. Get them to think about what other resources are available to help bring a production company up to speed on what they want to do. So they might already have a load of blogs that are going to be very useful to you in planning content and getting your head around the subject matter. They might have strategy documents or other written materials, that sort of thing. Get them to think about what they need most from a production company. And is that something that you can provide, or do you need to bring in other bods? Ask them who will deliver feedback and support your schedule and be the key contact for the production company. How can an external company take the load off the client, and in what areas, basically? What backup do they have on their side should there be other needs within their business? And, it threatens to derail a project if one person just goes on holiday or something, or gets pulled onto another project. So that's always a good one to plan ahead for. Do they have any in-house or presenting talent they could develop? And finally, really big and often overlooked one, promotion. Once it's made, they need to be pushing it on all their channels and communicating content in a timely fashion like all their other marketing. So who's going to take charge of that and knit it all together? Who's going to create additional promotional content and push that out to channels? How much are you as the production company doing? So obviously really important stuff to nail down early on in your planning stages. So you'll be pleased that I'm going to play you some audio on this next slide. What treatment or genre best suits this project? This is something you and your client might want to throw a few ideas around on. So the resources they have available will have a big say in what you actually end up pitching to the client. But if you have a creative conversation with them, you give a bit more scope to doing something really original and memorable with your creative treatment. So I've put this into 4 pillars for designing your format. And again, at the very start, just think about the biggest, most beautiful thing it could be, and then tweak to fit a budget. Then you'll get them inspired, but you'll also kind of get them on board with the process and the complexities of different projects. So the first pillar I'm calling unique. So what content do only they have? How is this unique? What gives them a standout offering? How can that be presented beautifully and memorably in audio form? How can you design a format that surprises and delights and stays with your listener? And how can you show rather than just tell with sound? I'm going to play you a clip from the Tree Council's podcast, Life on the Hedge. All this was recorded with young people out and about working in outdoors jobs, and it's all in their own words. And the goal of this was an organisation that wanted to showcase the breadth and diversity of career opportunities in the outdoor sector, basically. Here's a little clip of some of the stuff we got.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi Sash.
Yeah.
Hi Sasha. You all
Looks
right?
like you guys are cracking on despite the cold.
Yeah, a little bit windy, but it doesn't stop a hedge layer.
Nope.
Oak in particular is an amazing host for biodiversity. Thousands of different species rely on an oak tree. It's just really nice to be finally planting. The sun's out, we can see the beacons behind us, and it's a really special day.
It's so important to inspire the next generation, I think, especially living in an urban world. And it's so empowering seeing young people who haven't always had a relationship or have never had a relationship with nature being taken out into those green spaces.
I always felt more masculine than I did feminine, but I also always felt like the kind of gender binaries were really imposing on what I thought that I could do as a person in a female body. And I'm really proud of myself for overcoming that barrier.
So that's a really adventurous first podcast project for the Tree Council, but that everyone was on board with it. And I think what it ended up doing was just giving so much more life and, showing young people, other young people who were undergoing the same questions and hurdles and career decisions as they were, and smashing it. So that was also super fun to produce. So. The next pillar I wanted to talk to you about is genre. And I think the biggest misconception is that podcasts are simple 2-header formats. So you often, when you meet someone who doesn't necessarily work in the media, and they want to commission a podcast, they've experienced a lot of interview shows where you have these lovely one-to-one intimate conversations between a host and a different guest each week, and it's done in a studio or online. Very much easy to do. in recent times because of the pandemic, but I would just challenge this one every time. So firstly, why is your client thinking this? And what is it they're thinking? What are they picturing in their head? Unpicking that a bit. Are you missing a trick by doing a format like that? Because, they might have a good reason for keeping something simple and intimate, but at the same time, looking at the breadth of content they have within their organisation, the stories they have to tell and the people they have to tell them, and the locations they might have to tell them in, there might be another way of doing it. So you can tell a story in countless other ways. So think what original content you can make. Use the flexibility of the audio medium, deliver something memorable and must listen, and think outside of that studio. So also think about what the audience likes to listen to and do for other entertainment. And this brings us on to the genre point. Is that audience a news junkie? Are they true crime fans? Do they like fiction and storytelling? How can you use other genres or take things from other genres to present information in an original and compelling way? I'm going to play you a clip from Q's last podcast series, about how plants, basically they wanted to communicate the power of plant science to more people. So what they did was, rather than talking to plant geeks, they aped a true crime and mystery story genre to communicate basically the power of plant science. I think we should hear a clip. Yeah.
Okay, is your girlfriend conscious?
Yeah,
Is she awake?
yeah, same like me. But we are very worried though, because
Okay, so what makes you think somebody poisoned your food?
she was my ex-girlfriend. She came to visit me.
You think your ex-girlfriend's done it?
Yeah.
Just hours after he made this 999 call, Lakvinder Chima was dead. Today, we'll find out what happened when Q were called upon to help catch a killer.
Okay, and I just want to move on to the third pillar in that format conversation, which is talent. What talent and expertise does your client or brand have in-house who might bring credibility or reach or authority to what they have to say? Or they might be able to bring, you might be able to bring someone from further afield to bring a new perspective and new audience following. The client might have world-leading experts, but you might get a well-known presenter who has a broader appeal and to take it new places. And I think like a warm and down-to-earth narrator could bring scripts to life, unpack complicated jargon, if that's what they want to do for non-experts. Talent should always have a rationale behind it, basically, not just a Instagram following. In this next clip I'm going to play you, Josie Long was English Heritage's choice for a presenter to bring to life stories about people in the past, not just kings and queens. And Josie just brought so much of her own emotion and personality and experience to telling these stories in their series Speaking with Shadows.
I have heard of the poor laws. I think in my mind they're really linked with cruelty.
So Josie, what we're really talking about at the moment is the Elizabethan poor law. But what you are thinking of, and loads of people think about this when they think of workhouses, is something that comes much later. This is the 1834 poor law, which is completely different in character, because the poor law, with some changes, actually continues from the Elizabethan period right up until the 19th century.
So they split people up into three categories. What were those three categories?
Well, there's different terms that are used for them, but if you like to, you can think of the idle poor, which are the people who could work but aren't going to. They're vagabonds,
Legends.
They're vagrants, and they
Flanners.
Yeah, and they go off into the houses of correction or the bridewells. There are the impotent poor, the people who actually really couldn't do anything, and they go into almshouses or poorhouses. And then there's this third group, and they are the people that Framlingham Castle comes to be particularly associated with, who are the people who could work.
That's great fun to make. That one was recorded at Framlingham Castle. The final, the fourth pillar I kind of have outlined in treatment is that question of value again. So how can you present the organisation's special thing, their special sauce, to the audience to give maximum value to them in the time that they have available as well? So, if they don't have an hour to spare, they're not going to give you an hour. How can you make the most of their time? Anyone with a radio background will know respect for the listener's time is at the heart of every format and is absolutely crucial. So think about how that listener is listening to their show in daily life. So is it a catch-up commute? Is it a bedtime story listen? Is it a workout or something like that? Or is it, a drive, something like that? The question about the practicalities and recording of production is always worth getting covered in advance with your client, because it helps them work out their budget, and it also helps them potentially know what they need to pitch for in future if they're looking at going into a new financial year or something like that. They've got an upcoming budget. So are there any elements where they'd like to be hands-on? For example, if they want to invest in their own kit and some training for their staff to record bits, perhaps you as a production company offer this training or guidance. Have a look at roles again. Who will project manage everything on the client side? Will it be just the producer or the production company booking guests and doing the research? Will the client be able to add resources too? And the same goes with promotional and creating additional promotional assets as well and feeding them out on social media. And so we'll come to promotion again in a moment. Next question is, what does success look like? And the answer to this lies back in our second question. Why are they making a podcast? Discussing with your client how they'll be able to measure the impact of their mission is really, really important from the get-go too. You'll have qualitative data to measure. So things like how it might take the form of comments and reviews or social media shares from engaged listeners, content from a feedback form or from a survey. It could be awards, it could be newspaper, journal, website write-ups, things like that, to help you get the kind of qualitative side of how that mission is being accomplished. And the quantitative side of data is obviously a mix, or maybe not obviously, a mix of listener numbers, listen through rates and other information. So you might have QR codes, platform information, location, smart links. You can pepper in additional things like offers and offer engagements, look at the number of social media engagements for promotional posts and number of website hits for special websites that created to go with the podcast, that kind of thing. So all of that builds up into a really good picture of how successful your podcast actually, or your audio piece is actually becoming with that audience. Good to work out, will you as the production company be the one doing all that reporting? Do you have access to all that data, or will the client? Will you be providing a post-campaign analysis so that they can measure their return on investment? And how long are you going to give the podcast campaign to develop a following? I'd suggest not overnight if you're building an audience from scratch. But thinking about all of this leads us on to our next question, and it's a big and important one. So how will you promote the show? And it's often the one that catches clients out because they think about it too late. They've put all their energy into making this beautiful big idea, and then all their focus on that, and then they kind of get to the pushing it out there stage, and they realise that they've used up all that energy and resource. So you can encourage them to engage with this from the start, and obviously it's helpful to you as a producer as well, because you can gather content throughout, whether it's bits of video, photographs, additional audio reads when you're in the studio, that kind of thing, to help build all your promotional campaign. Promoting a show from the start takes just as much energy and creativity as making it. And I'd say the difference between producing a branded podcast and producing strategic branded content is the thing that you've done, is all that thinking about channeling your audience and funneling them into that particular place, that content. Your strategy is your roadmap for a focused and targeted audio campaign, and it includes who you want to speak to, why you're speaking to them, what results you want, how you're going to measure it, how it fits in with other communications that the client's doing. Where is that audience when they're not listening to the podcast? The Brands podcast exists within a whole ecosystem of communications, so you need to think about how you catch people and direct them from one place to another. It's a really highly engaged medium. The listeners will be really valuable for the brand, and the ones who sample and commit to stay because they're receiving the value the brand can offer them are the ones that you want to keep. That was anyway. After all, that word of mouth is really powerful. So that's the thing that will start doing the work once you start making an impact and really moving those first initial listeners. But because podcasts are longer and deeper engagements, they don't always get the numbers you have via social media reach or through mediums that provide a quicker, perhaps more transient interactions with the brand. So I would manage this expectation from the start. You may have conversations that come up around what numbers they can expect as well. And that all, again, frustratingly, as an answer, comes back to how much promotional energy you put into it, what platforms you're reaching, also the kind of style of the content as well, how broad or how niche it is in its appeal, obviously the guests that you're bringing in and how they're promoting it as well, whether they're happy to share all of this. So it's really hard to kind of give them specific listener numbers, and when that question does come up inevitably at the start before you begin, that's a great opportunity to basically talk about promotion with them and tell them why it's so important. Get them on board with that. Get the key stakeholders across their business to join a meeting so they know, it's on their radar. They've got 1,000 things in their social media schedule, for example. When is promoting the podcast going to be a part of that? And can you be strategic in how you release it? You could design the most beautiful piece of content, but it would be such a shame if no one heard it. And it's really vital your brand understands that too. You need to get the audio to people in a way that's easy for them to access, and they can do it in one click, basically. So you need to tell them about it. Okay, the next point is distribution and release schedule. Not everyone wants their audio to be heard by as many people as possible. So maybe your brand wants something like an internal podcast, or something that's available to select customers or behind a paywall. So that's a conversation to have from the start. They might need to put extra cost aside for a particular distribution platform if they favour a particular one. And if they want it to be found as many places as possible, will you be doing this for them as the company? Is it something that you'll be managing? Or is it more that they want one of those platforms that kind of you press every button and it's all in one place, but obviously convenience comes with a little more cost. In terms of your release schedule, consistency is key. So having a chat about why that's important for your audience and managing delivering on your listeners' expectation, that will help you build loyalty and habitual engagement. And, it can sometimes be tricky, especially if your client has multiple other concerns. So set that realistic plan for production that allows you to release a show to the frequency of your choice. Give yourself the time you need, give yourself some overflow, and make sure marketing is all geared around this too. Our next question, and this is our 10th question of the 10 initial questions to cover. It's a quick one, but it could be really, really insightful, enormously insightful to you as a producer. If your brand or client has dabbled in podcasts and audio before, so what worked for them and what didn't. You don't be afraid to find out what they loved about what they've done before as well, because that might be, don't kind of cut off your nose to spite your face there if you're starting from scratch and picking up from another company's work. Think about things like episode titles and content, marketing, staffing, which episodes work really well if they've released episodes previously, what formats worked, how timing went, what was the consistency of their release of episodes. If they're not sure about these individual elements, perhaps you can, experiment with these different factors in a future format, depending on how adventurous they are. You don't necessarily need to change everything all at once if they brought you in midway through a campaign. It's also a really great way to develop a series as well. So you can play with all this stuff. As you've kind of established your following and it's starting to consolidate, you can tweak things as you go along. So, it's always, if you're building an audience from scratch, you can, definitely do a lot of learning there. And that brings a lot of insight back into the organisation as well. If they learn something about a customer that they didn't know from other media, then, it's great to bear that in mind. So a quick recap on those 10 questions I've just rattled through. I can't believe I've been talking so long, but I promise I've just got one more slide to go before we have a chat and hopefully cover some questions. So if we could move on to our lovely blue sky. When you've got those questions worked out, basically you'll have the basis of a campaign, I hope, and lots of imaginative engagement from your client too. Can we go to the next slide, please, Peter? Yeah, there we go. It's just nice to look at, isn't it, on a day like today? It's been pouring with rain here in Sussex. But, I understand in reality, you probably won't be able to do all of your fact finding up front without terrifying and exhausting your client. So I just want to come back to the really important points that I think are the basis for a successful creative relationship. Firstly, to always keep in sight the end game of your programme. You both want to make something beautiful and valuable. You want to inspire people. You want to move hearts and minds with audio. That's at the heart of it. Keep that in focus. Secondly, your clients are human like you. They have many plates to spin. They have other projects to manage. They have stakeholders to listen to. and to appease, they've got compromises to make. So help them out and they'll become an ally in your shared mission, hopefully, rather than an enemy to your creativity. So always make time to listen to them and take on board their notes and pick your battles you're delivering a service to. Don't forget to communicate constantly and constructively. You may have limitations in terms of budget or resource or time, but I do think that getting those things right means you're on track for success. Finally, a great relationship needs a framework. It needs expectation, communication, and boundaries. So here's what I always try and do to enable those parameters from a practical perspective. Firstly, establish regular communications. So if you have regular check-ins with your client on a project, you can regularly keep them up to date on the status of the project. You can raise issues and get answers to questions that you might need that are holding you up. It also gives you a space to listen, and it gives you a space to respond to what's going on in the organisation and gather feedback. And it also helps you manage their expectation on anything that needs to adapt or be flexible beyond your, kind of initial project scope. Also, if they have amazing new ideas that come in halfway through a project, everything's possible. So it's also a great way of workshopping how you can achieve that, whether it's more budget, whether it's more time, another producer. Just collaborate in these sessions, and that's where you really build a trusting relationship, I think. Personally, I find it can be quite stressful to give the impression you're available all the time as well, because we all have other projects. And we have, we sometimes just have to go in a studio and turn off our mobile phones, or, pick up kids from school, or just have a holiday, whatever it is. So I would just advise structuring your communications and setting that expectation, obviously respecting that of your client as well. They've got their own lives. So if you have that clear from the start, it makes your client's life really easy to manage as well as your own. And they know they've got that set time with you, so it takes a little bit of the worry out of when are they going to respond to my email if it's you're in a location recording without signal, or you're just working doing some editing. The other thing I'd say is just really agree a timeline from the start, because that build in overflow to that, build in feedback rounds, build in rounds of edits. All this as well, if you give them visibility on that, helps them understand the process of production, the process of the work, the depth of work that goes into an audio project. People often, forget to think that there's an enormous amount of research and prep that goes in before you even get in the studio, with some projects. So I think another thing, it's really helpful to get them to aggregate feedback. So again, having that funnel in their organisation who goes and seeks out feedback from all of the stakeholders there and just gives it to you in one piece, so you can action that in one go. It's really helpful. It means, if you have that along the process, when you get to that final edit stage, it really is just final tweaks rather than massive changes to content or moving really complex 1,000 bits of audio around in order from one place to the next. So, obviously that can increase the risk of making mistakes when you're under pressure too, and we don't want that. So there we go. Anyway, I am going to hand back to Rosie now. Thank you for everyone for listening. I really hope that you found this useful and that you've taken something from it. I think we might have a little bit of time for questions now. And Rosie.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Katharine. That was fantastic. I do have a few questions that have come in. There's one which they're actually all to do with client relationships. And the first one is, have you ever had to actually say, I politely decline? And how do you say that?
That's a really good question. And yes, it's a really hard one. And I think we can have all number of reasons for declining. Honesty is often the best policy, but not if your client is a monster, because you don't really want to tell anyone that. I've not ever had a monster. So I've, declined projects perhaps because they weren't particularly aligned with something I felt I could be as passionate about, to be honest. I've declined projects because I just don't have the time or capacity to do it justice. How do you say that? Just tell the truth. I think if you have problems, or you have other more particular hurtful reasons for not wanting to take a project on, perhaps you've had some difficulty in the relationship with the client, then perhaps it's good to fall back on the resourcing and time excuse. However, in some cases, it may be a really useful learning to them if you've, say, worked together for a series and you can't continue to work, to explain the reasons why you're unable to continue with it. So, yeah, without kind of specific example, I can't really, be more specific in answer. Is that useful?
Yeah, that's great. We've had a few more questions come in. So the next one is, how do you handle a potential client that has no idea what a podcast is?
There are fewer and fewer these days, I've got to say. But so a potential client, that's someone that you want to pitch to. So that's really taking it down to grassroots with explaining the format. So firstly, you've got to get time with them, and you've got to, I think, understand a few of their needs. You know, what's that client potentially going to benefit from in this medium before you can start to sell in the benefits of this. Talk to them about a few things that might interest them personally. If they suddenly have a personal engagement in the medium and they start to listen, or you send them a link to, I don't know, you have a conversation with that client and they like surfboarding, send them a show you've found on surfboarding that you also enjoy, something like that. Get them on board with the medium so they can understand what it is to be a listener and how they feel about that piece of content maybe. But when it comes to actually selling stuff in to clients, and you've explained how the medium works, and you've explained why those sample sizes are smaller than their social media following, the things they love are things like, one, as an organisation, you can have deep engagement with the medium. So I think there was the Midas survey, it's a bit old now, 2020. I think it was 65% of listeners listen all the way through to a podcast episode. So you can compare that to maybe some other media they're doing, some other comms they're doing, and actually look at the timing that someone's giving to listen to whatever that client or brand has to say. You could talk to them about the medium in which it is listened, the style in which it is listened. It's a lifestyle medium, so people take it with them wherever they go. You can talk about the huge percentage of listening that's done on personal headphones as well. So it's someone's intimate me time that you are a part of all of a sudden. I mean, in the same way that radio is one of those mediums that is on in the kitchen, on in the car when you take the kids to school, and has that kind of integration in life. It's even more so with podcasts, because people can take their devices with them on the train, to the gym, to work, wherever they happen to go. So that's always a compelling one. They can be on any other topic you like, any topic you like. So you can lead the conversation. So if your organisation has something to say in an area, then you're the one who can create that conversation. You can have control over the misconceptions that are out there. You can change hearts and minds, and you can convert people that were less engaged with your brand. You can change their mind with audio. Again, it's just using emotion to connect with people through things that they love and care about. I feel like I've just done a really speedy podcast pitch there. I hope that's helpful.
That's great. Another question is, there's a different language that seems to be needed when trying to pitch ideas to brands versus traditional broadcasters, for example, KPIs. Any tips on good books or other content to try and gen up on this aspect? I think you might have a book that you can recommend.
Yeah, do you know what? My book's actually geared towards businesses who don't. Yeah. Oh wow, there we go. That's nice. Thank you. There it is. That's geared specifically towards businesses who want to either engage with an audio producer, or they want to have a go at developing some strategy themselves. So that might be helpful to you. However, personally, I do not have a marketing training. I do not have a sales background. I have a programming background. I came into this through programming, but working in commercial radio, where there were terms that would just appear on forms and you wouldn't really figure them out until a few weeks in the job, kind of thing. I shouldn't really say that, should I? But I'd say Audible is fantastic, actually. I've listened to hundreds of books on Audible. I take it out running with me. Over the last few years, I honestly have, if you listen to them on double speed as well, really helpful. There are also tons of marketing podcasts out there, which if you just look up in the category marketing podcasts, there are some really famous names as well. I think Seth Godin Godin, it might be his name. He's like the king of marketing, isn't he? He's been doing some really good stuff on Blinkist as well. So if you don't have a lot of time, you want to get to grips with some of the theory, then Blinkist is quite good as a platform for kind of short and sweet versions of books. And yeah, I mean, I've just kind of picked stuff up along the way. Otherwise, I wouldn't be put off by all these terms. Google's very helpful. If you want to know what KPI is, then it's key performance indicator. It's what you're measuring your campaign against. So I think it doesn't matter if you don't have the terminology. If you come at it with a sense of what do you want to achieve, who is it for, this whole strategic approach, how you're going to do it, what's your time frame, and how will you measure it. The most important thing in getting this stuff done is kind of keeping focus on that, thinking about your impact, I think, and being able to help your client measure that. The rest of it's just terminology, isn't it? So.
Interestingly, another question that's come in is metrics are clearly very important to brands. What are the key metrics that brands tend to be interested in other than just listener numbers? And what tools would you recommend for measurability?
Yeah, I dusted over that a bit earlier when I was talking about the quantitative kind of data that you can use to measure success. So yes, there are things like listener numbers, listen through rates, which you don't necessarily get on all distribution platforms, but things like Apple Podcasts allow you to give a sense of the duration people have stayed with your episodes. That's useful in informing how long your content should be. So that point I made earlier on about developing as you go along the format and refining it to your listeners. You get to grow them and know them a bit. So yeah, in addition to that kind of stuff you get within your podcast distribution platform, if you're putting it manually yourself onto places like Spotify, Apple, then they have a complementary set of statistics as well from their specific users, which may not necessarily be covered by your distribution platform as well. So it's quite nice if you are doing the post-campaign analysis, as in compiling all their data and and making theories about why and what's worked, then it can be quite useful to aggregate all of those sources. And also things like if you have given out QR codes with the podcast in marketing, if you have shared specific smart links using things like Podfollow, where you can create individual links for individual episodes, maybe you're using those links to share in one specific place. You can see the effectiveness of different platforms as well in bringing people into the podcasts. And you can kind of speculate in terms of the conversion to listens there by matching it up with other data. And I wouldn't write off the qualitative stuff as well, the nice reviews you get, the awards, the comments you get. I mean, don't listen to the bad ones, but obviously. But if there's something consistently coming up, like, oh, it's so long, or this presenter keeps saying so at the start of every sentence, something like that, then it can be quite useful in terms of refining and measuring what's working and what's not. So I just would link it back to what that original goal was. What is it they're measuring? If they want to drive people to site, then maybe they have a survey form, like I'm talking about an organisation that has a location they want to promote. I don't know, a restaurant or a kind of a that you might give them a booking code for, or a heritage site, and people are coming through the door and you want to survey them. Have you heard our podcast? Things like that can be really useful. But I think it just comes back to what you're trying to measure, the most important platforms.
We've had one other question, which I think is you're gonna have to give away a secret or two, because Michael has asked, can I ask about your approach to getting new business? Where do you advertise? Is it word of mouth? And how do you hear that businesses want or need you? Do you pitch ideas cold? Secrets, please, Katharine.
All of them, Michael, actually. Lately, there's been a lot of word of mouth stuff. That's come with time, but that's come with working on projects where, and back to that earlier question of not working on projects that aren't quite right for whatever reason, working on projects that you do really shine on, that you do really have the passion for, and you do have great relationships with your clients on, and you achieve success. Clients move around, they move people move between different organizations and they take you with them. They refer you to other people that are in connected organizations. You work with guests who appear on your programs, and you have a chat with them. I wouldn't say sell to anybody like that. That's kind of, that's a little bit unprofessional. But at the same time, if you just if you can engage with them and have a real passion for the subject, then often I think that word of mouth thing works, because you consolidate what your business specialism perhaps is and what you're really shining at. But yes, we do advertise as well. I think the website has been really powerful for we get a lot of hits on our blog just for people who need to find information. So we're happy to kind of offer that just in general, as we do with the book. I think any information or dialogue you can add out there to move the conversation around audio forward and help us, become increasingly sophisticated in this maturing industry is helpful. But at the same time, it means that people who do genuinely have questions that you can solve will come to you, and they might then pick up the phone or drop you an email. So I think word of mouth, doing what you're great at, and having a really great website is good as well. I think, a Chinook is about to go over, so please excuse any noise. There was, I was going to say on the cold approach thing, if you see a niche in a company, then a friendly interaction on LinkedIn. I don't think I've ever had success with just going in and saying, "Hey, do you want a podcast?" Because it's, you're just kind of sticking your finger in the sand. But actually, if you start to build a relationship with someone in an organisation you're interested in working with, then that can eventually, you offer value to them in terms of perhaps you see, other questions they have that you can help with, and then maybe eventually they want to put a bigger investment next year into audio. Maybe they're dipping their foot in the water by doing something in-house. So I think rather than cold approaches, building connections that way can be really helpful. And I'd also say, if you want the profile and you are a company, being a member of Audio UK can help you just raise your profile as well, and just kind of put you out there amongst all the other companies that might be visible to potential clients who are looking to tender. And there was one other thing I was going to talk about as well, but I've forgotten what it was. Promotion, like social media and that kind of thing. I'm not a big social media person, but we do promote our work. And, if clients are happy for us to do that, then the benefit of that is that by talking about the things that you have produced and you're really pleased with, you then, not only you're known for the person that is, kind of behind that and has enabled that, but similar customers are then able to see you and say, "Oh, you're the guys that do that. You know what you're doing in this subject area. Then let's talk." So, yeah, all of those things, Michael.
Thank you. And we should end now, but I have just had one last question in, and I think it might be a very quick yes or no answer. Kelly has asked, do you ever marry brands with existing podcast series?
So as in selling a podcast series to a brand?
Yeah.
That I've already made? Haven't yet, but could do.
Great idea.
Absolutely no reason why not. I just say on that, a brand has an agenda, and if it matches what you're making, then why not? And that point I made earlier about, if you haven't won a pitch for whatever reason, but you've got this amazing idea, then it might be right for someone. But I'd say just be prepared to adapt your creativity and know where the line is as well, know where the boundary is on this is the heart of our content and the concept, and that doesn't change and that doesn't get compromised by any client needs or whatever it happens to be. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Great. Thank you so much, Katherine. And thank you for joining us for this webinar, Working with Brands. It's been fantastic. I hope you've learnt a lot. And please do join us for webinars in the future. We've also got training sessions as well. There's loads being added all the time. You just need to get to audiotrain.co.uk.